tried to print out my agenda, so give me 1 second here. I'm sorry. 1 second.
I can assist you if you'd like, Laura.
Sure.
The first item we'll deal with is approval of the agenda. So mover, seconder, and then a vote.
Right. Thank you. So we need a, thank you. So John, and I need another seconder. Lindsay, great, perfect. That carries.
We'll just get a vote on that by show of hands.
Yes, so that was Lindsay and John that voted on that.
Well, they moved and seconded, and then everybody will vote to be in favor.
And we need to vote, right? Okay, that's
no worries.
Okay, then we need to vote. Everybody votes. Perfect. Okay.
And next
is the confirmation of minutes. I've got it now. Okay, perfect. Confirmation of minutes. We need to vote on that. Lindsay, someone else as well? Mary Jo, great. And then we need to vote on that as well. So we all vote. Perfect. And that carries. Okay, so okay, so everyone's read the minutes. Disclosure, any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Don't see any. No. Okay, great. We'll move on. Okay, so the citizen committee review of council remuneration meeting. Any delegations? I don't believe we have any tonight.
That's correct.
Briefings.
There are none.
Okay. Business presentation of mayor council member survey responses. Okay, so we have received those in the briefings. So we should open them for discussion, Derek?
All I would say is I've presented the data to you. I'm happy to answer any questions people may have about it if there's anything that's unclear. We did receive responses from, I believe it was 8 members of council. So we did get a fairly good sample. And yeah, the data's been presented. And if there's questions or any discussion, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we can turn it back to you, Laura.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any discussions about the data? You had a chance to go through it? No discussions? Any thoughts? No?
Lots of thoughts.
Yeah.
Any responses?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary Jo.
Are we in discussion about the councillor survey responses already?
Yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to confirm. I must have blinked there.
No worries, no worries. Yeah. Did you have something you'd like to say about the responses?
I'm going to wait till everybody else goes because I'm the least experienced here, and I'm sure there's some more intelligent things to be said by others, and then I'll see if everything is covered that I had noted.
Okay, go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I would say that the written survey responses largely meshed with what we found when we had the oral interviews with the councillors that participated in those. There was some overlap in terms of where we got to with the discussions. There seems to be quite a split amongst the existing councillors on whether or not they would benefit from some kind of administrative support. And also there seems to be quite a split about whether they use social media much or not, and if they do, whether they found it to lead to quite a bit of harassment or trolling and things like that. You know, the ones who didn't use it much didn't really find much issue with it. But the ones who did, I would say most of them found it to at least sometimes be hostile as a platform. And some councillors, I think it should be noted, reported hostile in-person interactions with citizens, even during the pandemic, it seems. So, which was very disappointing to hear. But yeah, so the survey results themselves, I think that honestly, you know, the amount of work is a lot. There's I think most people still seem to feel that it should be a part-time job, although I think there's a good merit for it to not. So one question I was going to ask of the city clerk is if it's possible to get a list of which communities in Ontario actually have full-time councils. I assume that they're just the bigger municipalities, so I can't imagine smaller ones would have, but if that's a list that we could get, that might be helpful in making a recommendation whether council should consider that in the future. I don't think we're there yet for this round, or that it's even in our mandate, but I think that that's something that we would benefit from having that information. Yeah, so I think that most councillors, I think all the councillors are putting in, maybe one exception, and I think there was probably one councillor who didn't fill out the surveys, it looks like, at all, but they all seem to be putting in pretty much full-time hours, even though it's meant to be a part-time job nominally, and everybody's working a lot of hours. And I think it's very noteworthy. Like, we have the comparator data from the 8 or 9 communities that we do have, and you know, the information is presented in different ways, but at the end of the day, the councillors and mayor are presiding over a $500 million budget, and you know, the amount of work that they have on their plates seems to be, and their compensation seems to be inconsistent with the magnitude of the responsibility that they have. So I think that you know, for myself, there's a lot of good reasons to keep it as a part-time job, and we've seen them in previous reports that previous iterations of this committee have come to. But there's also a lot of reasons why one might want to make it a full-time position instead. So I think we should give that some thought in our discussions. Maybe not today, but yeah. So those are my main observations from the survey data, at least.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Lindsay, go ahead.
We only finished, just for the rest of the committee to understand, we only finished the one-on-one interviews last Monday, and we have the notes from the individual ones, and those will be summarized in time for the next meeting. And I just wanted to echo what Jordan was saying, but I think that the one main message that I continued to hear was that you can do this job part-time, but you're not going to do it well. And I think that's the critical piece when you're dealing with a budget of that size, and many of the counselors that we spoke to work full-time elsewhere, and if they have younger families, if they, you know, the one line I loved is, the only way that you can do this job is if you're retired, independently wealthy, or self-employed and can manage your own hours. So that, you know, the argument that it opens it up, the potential for more candidates to run, is incorrect as far as I'm concerned. You're actually you're not opening it up to young people with young families by being part-time and making 40 grand a year, right? They're not going to leave their other jobs to do this with that kind of pay. So it's just fascinating, because you look at, you know, the one counselor we spoke to used to do this, you know, while working full time. Now he's retired and is doing this. And he said the hours haven't fluctuated, but the whole dynamic of being a counselor has changed, especially with the pandemic. There are more demands. It's not a 25 hours a day. You're on call 7 days a week. And you are expected to respond to the constituents who reach out to you, who call at all hours. and you have to respond or you will be shamed, whether it's online, whether it's lots of yelling, lots of crazy dialogue. So I think all of those factors have to be considered as we move forward. I don't know how, and I know that it is not in our mandate to recommend, but I think it was recommended by counselors that we spoke to, some of them, to make that recommendation as a continuation of the report that we write. And I would strongly recommend that we have that discussion moving forward.
Lindsay, you mean the discussion of suggesting that there could possibly be a referendum next year, next council?
Because if we
To
don't do it,
evaluate this,
like,
yeah.
and that's what's always amazing to me is that, you know, the counselors all said, if you give us a pay raise, there will be hell to pay, right? The public will not accept that. So if we want change, or if change is going to go forward, it has to be through a referendum, because councillors can't vote this in as a change, right? It has to go to referendum. So if that's all prepared and ready to go, which is a long shot for 2022, those changes wouldn't happen until 2026 anyway. Right. So it's just, it's the slow pace of, okay, let's make this change and we're going to do it now. Well, that's not the way it works. Right. So if we don't do it now, then it's that missed opportunity for yet another 5 years, 4 years, in my opinion.
Thanks. Okay. Any other comments? Indira, we were at the section that we were discussing the survey, and Lindsay and Jordan, we did all the interviews from to the counselors, and we got their feedback, but the notes aren't ready yet, and they will be shortly. So we're just commenting right now about the feedback from the survey that was sent in the minutes.
Thanks,
and
Laura. I appreciate that, and apologies for having to join late.
That's okay. It happens. Do you have any feedback or comments that you'd like to?
Sure. So just on the question of recommending that the counselors ought to be full-time, I think we did identify earlier that was not within the mandate of this committee. I don't think that it prevents us from suggesting that further work needs to be done to actually investigate that issue. And to Jordan's earlier point about maybe getting some additional comparative information. But again, I think we have to be really disciplined about what's within our mandate.
I agree. I think maybe we can just put a note at the end saying, through our discussions that we've had with counselors, this is something that may be considered for the next council. There be a referendum in 2026. Or I'm sorry, not 2026, in the next year, right? In the next council term. Yeah, I don't think we should focus on it a lot, but I think it's something that we could maybe put in our recommendations, is what we've heard and what we've thought of. Now, regarding the survey, Indira, did you see anything that stuck out that you'd like to discuss, or anything else that?
I did. I went through and I had made some annotations, and it was interesting to me because among our mandate is to comment on administrative support. So there was some sort of internally inconsistent information, if I put my labor hat on, because the ranking order for administrative tasks in terms of time was the lowest, and it seemed to be pretty much the lowest across the board. But then in the more qualitative responses, they're not consistent though, but there were some comments with regard to benefits of administrative support. And I thought there were a few comments that I thought were interesting around, well, maybe it's actually not administrative support that's needed. Maybe it's, maybe there was a reference, for example, to research. It would be really helpful if there was someone who was able to do some research, which in my mind is something different than administrative support, which might be assistance in meeting bookings or things of that nature. So I thought that there was a lot of very good information there to inform the recommendation. It probably requires, some specific conversation around it, unpacking what was presented.
Yeah, I think those are good comments. I think in my mind, and Lindsay and Jordan, you can add to this if this is what you thought too, but in our discussions with them, I found a lot of counselors said how they would send in a question to staff, and what took a lot of time was the follow-up on the question to staff. So maybe that would be a situation where an administrative assistant or someone that they could share could follow up on these questions to staff. Let's say you sent in a request for a pothole, for example. You needed the pothole fixed. You sent this request in and nothing got done. And then you send in another request, and then you send another request. And it just it happens. It happens. It gets lost in the bureaucracy or it gets lost somewhere. And then someone else's pothole gets fixed and your pothole hasn't. And then you get another complaint. Oh, well, his pothole got fixed and mine didn't. So this would be something an administrative assistant could help with, is following up on these requests. And that's what I heard. I also heard that there could be research as well, like on special requests to for what would you call it? Bringing more motions forward to get work done or to get more information too. Those were the big ones that I heard. Did you guys hear any other things that they needed?
What I found was that it was very independent. Like the contact us element. If it's too bad that more residents wouldn't take that route as opposed to going directly to their counselor, and the counselor is the buffer, which we've learned, which takes a great deal of time. And what Laura was saying as far as tracking these requests that go through. But there are very few that want to let go of being that connection, right? They want to be that person, that liaison that helps. But it becomes overwhelming. So I agree with Laura with like the research is a big thing. Probably almost all of the counselors we spoke to mentioned that same thing, that it would be great to have that independent person that they can go to and say, I need comparatives in other cities and this, that, and the other thing. But they're very, what's the word? What's the best word to protective of their stuff, right? So if they want to put a motion forward, they don't want to share that information with anybody. So it has to be very select, and that's why one counselor, and I believe that was in the survey responses too, saying, I want money to hire my own admin assistant, and like, well, that's not going to happen. But I understand what he's saying, and because a lot of the a bunch of the other counselors said the same thing. But I don't want to share, right? I don't want to. And then other people said 3 to 4 counselors can share somebody with admin. But I agree, the admin part of it is more of the research, and it's more of the tracking requests that go through contact us through the city page.
And also a new counselor might need help too, and where to go and who to talk to, and that would be a big help for admin support too, which I think would be super beneficial. Because when you start out as a new counselor, you don't know who to call or who to contact. But then a good question. I was talking to Derek today, and he had some ideas, and maybe Janet can help with this as well. But if we hired a couple full-time admin assistants and split them up within the counselors, they would be a full-time person. But then how would we cover them when they're off taking vacations? Who would pick up the slack on that, and how would we work that out as well? That could be something we need to consider as well too. So that's something else. But I think personally, my opinion would be yes. That would really alleviate a lot of maybe stress from the counselor, as well as a burden of work. But that's my opinion. So,
Laura, I'm not sure if you're monitoring the raised hands, but I was just going to comment.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see them. No. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to comment that the other remark that I thought was actually quite insightful was that there perhaps are some processes within the city that are could be enhanced. It could be improved to sort of, so rather than layering on administrative supports to be chasing down information that may or may not have been actioned or tracked, are there some ways that internal processes could be looked at so that it would actually eliminate some of those things? It was well articulated, I thought, in the survey results, but I thought that was it was worth contemplating, because the solution may not be an administrative support, and if by administrative support we're talking about secretarial, it may be some other supports or investments in the city that can help the machine and mechanism of the city operate a bit more efficiently for everyone, including the councillors.
That is a big question and a good question. We might be opening Pandora's box, though. The big scope. Have I missed anybody with their hands up? Okay, Mary Jo, go ahead.
It's been interesting listening, because in some ways, in the position that I'm in currently and my relationship with the city of Kingston, it's sort of similar to a counselor, in the sense that I've got to get things done, or I've got questions to be answered, or research that I need, and I don't know who to reach out to. When I'm hearing you talk about some of the challenges, and being familiar with how council worked in Belleville, and this isn't what they did, but as I'm thinking about it, it's almost like, wouldn't it be nice if there was a triage where the questions for any counselor come in? It's probably not realistic, but I need to share it, because the questions come in. Counselors, if you have a relationship with a counselor, then it's sort of like a special relationship, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'll just call Laura, or I'll just call Sean, or whatever. Or yeah, he's my neighbor. And then you have this immediate one-on-one contact. But in some ways, it would be nice if, especially in a city this size, if they had a little bit of a screen before they were approached by their constituents. And I don't know if that's like totally faux pas, but if a question came in that didn't really need to go directly to a counselor, a city staff person could take care of it, or a department could take care of it. But things that needed to be personally addressed, because that's most of what they do really, is relationship building and making sure that the needs of their constituents are being met, then of course that would go to the appropriate counselor. But so it's more of just like a triage would work in a hospital. And there is a triage in City of Kingston, a woman named Heather, for the types of things that we at the BIA need, where we're supposed to call her, and then it's supposed to be sort of disseminated amongst the right people. But that would just give them one layer of, okay, I don't need to answer these 40 emails, because they're all things that really don't need to be answered in particular by me. So that's just my thoughts as I'm listening.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just sort of building on what Indira said as well. And I think, because I see some of the comments in there, but the need for support. But I think what we could probably look at doing is really drill down and find out what are the exact needs of the support, because then it may not be just an admin person. Maybe it's an admin person. Maybe that's part of the support that's required for council. But maybe it's some type of like online ticketing type of system for issues that, like Laura, you mentioned, somebody sends it, a constituent asks about a pothole to be filled. Instead of just sending an email off to city staff to have that addressed, it would be like an online ticketing system where they submit it, it gets populated right away and gets sent off to whoever it gets sent off within the city staff. And then when they're done it and it's been filled, they click complete, and you get a notification as a city councilor saying this has been completed. And that way it's an online. Anyways, I think there's some tech solutions that could be had to solve some of the administrative burden. But I think there also might be a need for a person as well. But I think I need to better understand what the actual needs would be from councilors. If it's booking meetings, I think someone made a note to a CRM tool in here as well. Maybe there's a CRM tool that could be used for booking meetings and planning councilors' times and everything else. So I would just, before we jump to, and I know we won't jump to it, but before we decide to just give them administrative support, let's figure out exactly what the needs are, and maybe there's other solutions that we can apply.
Okay, thanks. Those are good suggestions. Yes, go ahead, Mary Jo.
Just building on what John just said, there is a ticketing system within the city. I'm sure you guys know that. The struggle with the ticketing system is the squeaky wheel still gets the grease, right? So you can put a ticket in and say, I want this pot, but this pothole is the most important thing in the whole entire city. And 17 other things get in the way within 5 minutes. And then you're on the back burner. Where a counselor comes in handy is where they say, listen, I've already put this in as a ticket. I really need this to be fixed because of this, this, and this. And so the ticketing system works great when you know somebody, just like anything else. That's what we find anyway at the BIA.
But can I add to that, Mary Jo, and give you the reality check is that sometimes as a counselor, you can still get ignored and, other things can creep up and then it looks bad on you, unfortunately.
Exactly. And it's the same with us. I guess that's what I'm sort of saying is
I know.
even with the ticketing system, it still takes that, like, hey, I'm here looking at you at your desk. Yeah.
I know. Because other priorities.
Jordan's hand's been up.
Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks. A few points to follow on, I guess, and I'll start where we just left off, and that's with the support for counselors. I got the sense that there wasn't overwhelming support for it. A lot of counselors, if they were supportive of it from our one-on-one interviews, it didn't come through quite as much in the surveys, but if they were to have an administrative support person, they would want it unique to them. Most of them don't want to share it for reasons that are a bit disappointing. But that's the reality of it. So I'm not sure that it would work out. I don't fully understand why, for the research part of things, if a counselor had some questions on a topic that needed to be researched, why they couldn't direct staff to do that. I think that should always be an available option. Maybe there's not sufficient staff resources available for that to happen, but so I think just increasing the general staff available to be tasked by council as a whole would be a helpful thing. But to have individual support, I didn't get a strong sense that was going to be super important. As to I guess it comes down to a lot of times constituents see their counselor as the person who gets their pothole filled, rather than the person who's making policy level decisions on where the city's going to be in 20 years in terms of housing and growth and all kinds of really important things. I mean, a $500 million budget, right? And we're phoning them about potholes and weeds. Like it's nonsense. The contact us is there. And it would be best if all I know why they don't do it, but if counselors just told people that contact them, look, this is the phone number, contact us, they'll put you in the queue, your thing will get fixed. I mean, that should be the standard response. And to pretend like you have some sway, or even worse, if counselors actually have the ability to bump somebody's pothole up over the next guy's pothole, I mean, that would be just wrong. There's a queue system, a ticketing system that the city uses, and everybody should be routed to that. As I understand it from the interviews, a counselor gets the call or an email, a text, whatever, about a pothole, and they just submit the contact us request anyway. It's a hugely inefficient use of their time when they have a lot better things to be doing. So I think the city would be far better off just raising awareness, education about the role of counselors and the availability of contact us. I mean, every time you get a bill from Utilities Kingston or your property tax statement or something, it should say, here's how you reach the city when you have a pothole, or the snowplow didn't do your thing, or the garbage people left your recycle bin behind, or something like that. It's not what our city council should be doing, frankly. So I'm not convinced that more support dedicated just to its counselors is, I didn't hear that as, across the board would be useful. And where I did hear it, it was such a disparate range of what people wanted that I don't think there's enough common ground to make that viable. If there is, though, it's clear that the additional support should not be considered part of the compensation package for counselors. That's just support. It's a tool that's available to them. It's a resource. But related to that, I think in the surveys and in the interviews, there was quite a few people who indicated that they would like to have a proper meeting space within their districts, where you don't make somebody come and buy a $8 cup of coffee just to have a sit down with you, right? So I don't know if people aren't using maybe the libraries sufficiently, or maybe not every district has a public library, but that was something that I heard again, that I think, there's not adequate space in City Hall itself for these meetings to happen one-on-one, or larger like town hall type events, which are not really happening now due to the COVID. But I imagine, I think we heard a lot that people would like to get back to those in-person things, that the connection, the one-on-one connection is much more viable, meaningful when it's in person. So I think that that's an issue to deal with. One other thing that I think I saw a little bit in the surveys was just the amount of work that the committees take. And so I think one thing we might give some thought to is whether there should be additional compensation per committee, or maybe different committees have different levels of compensation associated with them, just like in the same way that being deputy mayor has some level of compensation. I think that service on committees is a tremendous burden, and it's not always shared equally amongst all of the councillors, for often good reasons, not always, but quite often. There's good reasons that not everybody's sharing equally in the committee work. But it's, I think, quite a reasonable thing to do to compensate councillors for that work. And I think that's one way that the compensation package could be increased without it being too distasteful to the the people of Kingston, in that we sort of separate and aside from the compensation as council, just like getting the per diems and travel allowance for going somewhere. So those, I think, are a few other things that we need to take into account. One thing that nobody seemed to say in the surveys, I didn't see it at least, but it was absolutely clear when we did the interviews, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. But the onboarding process is quite lacking. Especially for the new counselors, despite their best intentions, they don't come in able to hit the ground running. There's quite a bit of learning on the job. We heard, the first year or two even, it takes before you really know what you're doing. And we've been talking a little bit about the role that a support person might play in helping with that. And that's absolutely the case, that, having somebody who you go to for your questions would be helpful. But I see existing staff should be filling that role. I don't see that that's something that we need to hire. The city should hire somebody just to be the question answer of councillors. I think that should already be existing for council to be able to go to the clerk or to somebody on the staff who they ask when they don't know where to direct their questions. It just seems to me that should exist. It shouldn't be something that we separately need to have. And if it doesn't, then we should. But I can't see it as being support for an individual councillor per staff person. I think one or two staff people who that's part of their job, but not maybe all of their job, that would be important. So I think those are things that we need to consider in the recommendation. But
I'd like to make a comment to that, Jordan.
Sorry, I'm done.
Yeah. It's difficult sometimes to get an answer from staff because they are so busy. So let's say you had a question, you were following up with a staff member. They could be on vacation, or they could be too busy, and they'll put you through to someone else, and then you get thrown down, and then it's just, you're just too busy. They're too busy. And you can't get an answer for a week, and you need an answer immediately sometimes. And that's why I think the idea of having your own support staff, they could go through the whole, the maze of finding the right person to get this, and they're at the city hall. Because if you think of it, I'm working full time. I have a request. I don't have time to chase it through the maze of all these different people. And that person, the admin person, can do that because they're currently at the city hall, and they can go to each desk and find out the right answer. That would be the reason for having a support staff, because they're very busy.
No, I'm sorry. If I can just pick up on that, I know Indira has her hand up, but I just want to follow up with that before we move to another topic possibly. And that is, we heard a lot in the interviews about this staff shortage and the problem of retaining staff. And in large part, it seems to be, maybe not exclusively, but it seems that the fact that council is part-time and meets therefore in the evenings, late into the evenings, is a huge barrier to retaining staff and finding people to get that support. And I think that that's a big part of the problem, is that the counselors are all part-time and are working. Those who are working their day jobs 9 to 5, and then they're working from 7 till midnight on council stuff. And when they're doing that, staff isn't available because staff is working 9 to 5. And, so even if you wanted to, you couldn't possibly get timely communication with staff because council is part-time, and therefore most counselors have to work in the evenings, and staff isn't, except for when there's meetings, which is not infrequent. And then staff is compelled to work into the evenings. And how do you have a family life when you're most of the time 9 to 5, and then 5 nights a month you're 7 to midnight or 2 in the morning? I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a big problem though, the retention of staff and the sufficiency of staff, right? I mean, we need to have enough staff to actually do the work, and the less staff there is, the more likely the staff that are there will burn out and not stick around Kingston either, right? So it's a huge problem that I think needs to be addressed as part of, council's role would be a lot easier if there was sufficient staff to do the other work.
Again, that's out of our scope though. But thank you for the suggestion. Who is next? Was it Indira? Did you have your hand up?
Thanks, Laura. My hand went up just in relation to Jordan's comments about, considering compensation for committees. So it was actually a question. I wasn't sure if there is a selection process for participation in committees. And I raised the question in the context of, we want people to be motivated because they have an intrinsic interest or subject matter expertise in a particular committee area, not because of offering added compensation. So just that may be mitigated if people go through a selection process. So just was curious about that.
Right. Derek, I see you popped up on the screen. Did you want to explain the selection process, or would you like me to?
If you'd like to, Laura, I forgot that you had been through that, and I'll let you go ahead, and I can add anything that might need to happen.
Why don't you go? No, you go ahead. You're the expert.
Okay.
You've been, and I might have missed something in the new year round. So go ahead.
I finally stopped calling you Councillor Turner after 3 years. So, so the selection process is staff will reach out to councillors with a list of all of the committees, ask them to indicate which ones they are interested on serving on. We really hope that we get a perfect match of 6 people want to volunteer for a committee with 6 members. And then we take it basically that list up to council, and there'll be sort of 3 separate distinct motions on a council agenda. It's sort of, affirm the committees where we have an exact match between volunteers and the number of committee members. Sometimes we have more people, not often, more people volunteer for a committee than there are positions. And in that case, either members will step back or there'll be an actual sort of runoff election happen at council. So the committee positions for councillors are selected in a vote by the council members themselves. And then in cases where happens more frequently than too many people is not enough volunteers for a committee. So for example, Laura served on planning committee for many years. That has a high workload to it. It for the longest time was 6 members, but we had difficulty as the city finding a full complement. So we had to bring it down to 5 members, have recently got it back up to 6 members. So that's the process. There's not really an application process. It's more of, are you willing to volunteer for the committee? And if there's a runoff required, then it's voted on by the council members themselves. I think I captured that accurately, Laura.
I think you did a wonderful job. Thank you. Yeah. Does that help, Indira?
I see Lindsay has her virtual hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the comment that was so prevalent during those interviews was on planning. So those councillors who are not on planning have done that intentionally because of the workload, and those who are on planning are saying that it is as much work, if not more, than preparing and attending council meetings. With the growth in the city of Kingston, the demands and the regulations, and that's a whole different beast. And it's so very important, but it is incredibly time consuming. So I think, going to, whether it's compensation or it's some recognition of sorts, because I think, from what I understand from everyone we spoke to in the survey results, the planning is like crazy. So there has to be, in my opinion, some kind of reference to it. And as I agree with somebody else saying that along the same lines as being deputy mayor, that is a huge responsibility on top of already council duties.
Okay.
Just
thanks, Lindsay.
just a clarifying question then, Lindsay and others. Do we see or understand that the planning committee is unique, or are there others that are similarly? So it's really the planning committee potentially that is one that we might want to turn our minds to.
And I think, Derek, just what's the terminology? There's like 4 of the big committees, right? But planning by far is like the biggest of the big, right?
Oh.
To put it very basically, which is what that was, and I apologize for being so simplistic about it all.
No worries, if I may, Laura. The city
Okay.
does have, I love talking about governance, this is what I do. There are 4 standing committees of council. These consist of 6 members of council, and they basically function as a committee that is a subcommittee of council that is supposed to examine issues more in depth and then make recommendations up to council, understanding that certain things require more study or more discussion than would be allowable at a council meeting. So planning committee is one of these. It deals with a zoning bylaw and official plan amendment under the Planning Act. It meets twice a month. So they will meet roughly 24 times a year, not including special meetings, which you can, I think in average year, we might add 2 or 3 of those. So there's potential for 3 meetings a month on Thursday evenings. There are also 3 other standing committees. They meet every second month. And those have a much less frequent. So those 3 standing committees, which cover environment, arts, and administrative policies, they may meet up to a maximum of maybe 6 times a year, but often less. So planning is definitely, Lindsay's characterization of planning as the biggest time commitment is accurate by quite a large degree. And I do believe also quickly that there is one comparative municipality that does provide compensation for planning committee. It is Sudbury, which I was surprised because that's the only municipality I've ever heard of in comparators that provides compensation for a committee.
And just for clarification, is a minimum attendance to, so those 24 meetings, in order to maintain standing on a committee, do you have to achieve a minimum number of meetings that you're in attendance of?
Don't believe there's any official rule in that regard. However, my experience shows that people who volunteer to serve on the committee will attend as much as they can. And if they cannot, they typically will resign from the committee. Planning is particularly important that we maintain quorum at it. It requires 4 of 6 members attending, and it deals with a lot of legislated applications. So people do understand the commitment, I think, when they sign up for it. If not, they only serve on it for 1 term.
It's a big committee, and you're being part of that committee, you learn a lot about the city as well, and you learn about everything that's being built. And when it comes to council, when the motions come to council, you've read the file and you know it cold. So it's very helpful to be on that committee, so that when you're making the decision, it's a lot easier because you know the ins and outs of that decision. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I just want to add to this that really the attendance at the meeting is the easy part, right? It's the preparation for the meetings. I mean, people are being given 500-page, effectively binders to prepare for a council meeting. Planning is, I'm sure, no different. It's a huge thing. And planning, especially amongst the committees, is one where the decisions you make today are generational, right? They're not, it's not like deciding, I don't know, some trivial thing of whether we should, it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing, something in the next 3 years or 5 years or next month, whether we should raise this flag on that day or declare, it's not like one of those things. It's, the predicament we're in now with the housing crisis has everything to do with decisions that were and weren't made 20 years ago, right? And so these things won't be solved quickly, and they're fundamentally important, and we need people in the job of council who have the time to be able to make these decisions in a thoughtful, well-reasoned way, and to be compensated properly for doing that, right? So I think that we shouldn't get lost too much in how many meetings there are, how long the meetings are. It's at the end of the day, I think, maybe it's next on the agenda, but the metrics by which we're going to come to our decision of what the compensation should be, I think needs to absolutely take into account the weight of the decisions that are being made. These things are affecting the entire 100,000 and some people of Kingston, not just now, but for the next generation and two.
Are you finished, Jordan?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, John, go ahead.
Just one last thing on the committee front too. If we do go down that road of compensation for committees, and understanding that the planning committee sounds like it's very, very labor intensive and time intensive, I would just want to make sure that, and maybe it's outside the purview of this committee, but I would like to at least make a recommendation to have the terms of reference for those committees looked at, to have some mechanism built in there for people to attend the meetings. And I appreciate what Jordan said. Most of the work goes in well before the meeting. I totally agree with that. And I understand from Derek's comments that, it's for the most part, people attend because they want to attend and they want to be good committee members. But if we're going to be physically compensating them for being on the committee, I'd want some type of mechanism to make sure that they attend a certain number of meetings a year or a percentage of them.
That's a good idea. I like that. Yeah. Thanks for your input. Any other comments about this? Questions? I have a question for Derek. Derek, the Sudbury Planning Committee, do you know what they would pay them in compensation for the Planning Committee?
That's a great question. I do not have the answer, but I will follow up with them shortly. And I think this is actually, perhaps, Laura, a good segue into another one of our agenda items, which is the discussion about the methodology for determining compensation, or remuneration, I should say. I feel that my goal of getting a solid yes or no on whether or not administrative support should be recommended is not going to happen tonight based on the discussion. So I will amend my work plan, but perhaps we can move into the remuneration discussion.
Lindsay wanted to say something. Go ahead, Lindsay. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Derek, I'm curious, the clerk's department, there is not one person dedicated to council, correct? I don't want to, I'm assuming not, but I just wanted to confirm that.
That is correct. So currently council will come to sort of any staff member that they are comfortable with. It could be the city clerk, the deputy city clerk. There are 2 other committee clerks, such as myself. We also have the city clerk has an administrative assistant who handles a lot of these as well. So there's about 7 or 8 different clerks department staff that it's not technically within our job description to provide administrative support, but it often falls under the category of other duties as assigned.
Okay. Is there a job description for a city councillor?
I do not believe so. I have not seen one. I think Miss Janes, I see, is popping on here and may be able to add something.
Hey, Lindsay, that's a great question. The short answer is no. The requirements to serve as a municipal councillor are set out in the Municipal Elections Act, which is simply that you need to be a resident of the municipality, you need to be over 18, and not disqualified from running under any other act. And that in itself is the job description. Those are the requirements that somebody has to fulfill in order to file their nomination papers. Just to go back, one question, or I think maybe it was your question as well, Lindsay. In terms of the staff available in the clerk's department, we do have 6 to 8 sort of regular full-time staff that are available to assist counselors. As Derek said, it's not sort of part of our job description, but we all do pitch in that regard. We also do have a position. It's a council research intern. This is a partnership with Queen's University and their MPA program. It's not a position that we've been able to fill the last 2 years just with the COVID-19 pandemic. But we work with Queen's to recruit somebody from the MPA program, and they come and work at the City of Kingston for about 4 months in a research position. So members of council do have that position available to them once every year, COVID exceptions, to assist with research. So there is a bit of a research component that we do have, but just like everything, COVID has impacted that somewhat.
Yes, that's true, and that was very helpful. I didn't use the service, but a lot of the other counselors did, and that was very nice to have that available. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, discussing the remuneration determination and preferred option for administrative support, not report. So remuneration determination and preferred option. Okay, so are we anywhere for remuneration?
I think perhaps a starting point would be I've shared some metrics that were used by previous iterations of the committee. So perhaps people have a preference for one of those, or perhaps a completely new metric that hasn't been thought of. So I just know the importance, and I think Jordan mentioned it, of coming up with a solid methodology behind any final remuneration recommendation.
Right. I think, Jordan, did you want to start us off with this? You're muted. Okay.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
All right.
I think that it's, I appreciate the information that Derek's compiled for us. Depending on which, metric we choose, there's arguments to be made that we're a little high, we're a little low. But I think in talking with the current counselors, there's a general sense that their compensation is not commensurate with the amount of work that they do. I don't think any of the counselors, when we interviewed them, said that the salary is too high, the remuneration is too high. There were a not insignificant number who said that it should be substantially higher, including ones who have no plans to run again. And many also said that they felt that there would be no appetite on the part of the constituencies to see a major increase beyond maybe inflationary. So I honestly think that, despite having metrics available to us, the remuneration should not go down, and at the end of the day, it should go up by at a minimum of an inflationary amount, a cost of living amount, or something tied to that. Looking at the data, I think, for example, the cost per resident, the cost for the mayor is a little under the average value. The cost per councillor is 2 cents more per resident. But really, it's a good bargain. I mean, for $1.33, we're getting a mayor and a councillor in whatever district you live in per year. It seems like, where do you get that kind of value for your money? I think that's a fair way to do it. If we look at the results I found it very interesting, the results on per unit of operating budget. And in that case, the higher the number, the better you're doing. And Kingston is the best or second best in that, along that metric already, in terms of value for money. I do have some concern that somebody might say, well, then there's incentive to have a higher operating budget so that you get a higher salary, which of course I don't think would ever happen. But, so I'm a little bit, thinking we shouldn't probably tie it to that metric, but it is I think a very valuable metric to use, right? I mean, when we're talking about a $500 million budget, it's important to, I think, say how much is the compensation of your board of directors as a fraction of the budget they're overseeing, and it's a an insignificant amount really in the big picture. So those are the main things that I picked out of it, was that we're already, amongst the comparators we selected, the Kingston City Council councilors and mayor are right in the good region. I would say, they're, depending on which specific metric we choose, we're either the most cost effective or very close to the average in terms of cost effectiveness of the councilors and mayor. And so I would say, in a sense, it doesn't matter which metrics we pick, they're all pointing in the same direction. We're getting good value for our money right now, comparable to what everybody else is spending in the comparators. And I think that there's a good argument to have a modest increase be recommended. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Anyone else?
Indira has her virtual hand.
I would love to. I can't. Oh, there it is up in the corner. Okay, thank you.
Actually, the best way to see it is to actually turn on your participants pane, and then you get the hands beside people's names. Just my tip from chairing Zoom meetings. So I actually favor looking at the alignment relative to budget, and I think that we've got both the operating budget and the capital budget. I come at that from a few perspectives. One is I administer our executive compensation, and a number of years ago, the ministries the government put in regulations, and one of the things and one of the corridors that they looked at was how much money are you spending on your executive relative to your operating budget, compared, for example, to bed size, which in my world would perhaps be the comparable to the population size. I also think that in looking at the combination of operating and capital budget, it reflects some of those complexities that we've talked about. That and to Jordan, I think you stated it so well. We need to recognize the critical nature of these roles and the decisions that they make and influence. And so I think that behind that, much of the outcomes of work and decisions is monetized through the budget. So it's how are we spending our limited monies for capital improvement, for example, infrastructure improvement. So I actually do favor looking at it as and Derek and I had some conversations about how do you calculate it then. And in looking at I hear your point, Jordan, about we're sort of mid-pack. I would generally say that it would be preferable to go with the mean, although I see that Brantford is a bit of an outlier. Their proportion of compensation is, it does seem to be, to me, an outlier. So that would then tend to lean you in the direction of a median rather than the mean. So that's where I would sort of be thinking would be, because I absolutely hear the qualitative feedback that we've had through the interviews, but I think that there's some benefit in having the compensation aligned to something that's very concrete. And then to the point about, you know, do we say as a principle that it is not going to be reduced, so that this is, and we know certainly for the mayor position that, you know, if this were a private industry organization, you can't hire a CEO for less than whatever that amount is. So potentially making some recommendations that it you know, not be reduced.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Derek, go ahead.
Just to a comment Jordan said, and I know we had this discussion, Laura, I feel I was remiss in not including this in earlier information, but the current structure for council remuneration is that there is an increase each year based on the previous year's CPI. So while technically their base salary is $40,000, in actuality, in last 2021, I'm trying to think of which years I'm talking about here. No, in 2020, back 2 years, the payment was more around $42,000 as a result. Now, keeping in mind, they also, I believe council, and Janet will correct me if I'm wrong, that they did vote against their increase last year because of the pandemic. So there is that sort of cost of living factored in.
Thank you. I'm glad you shared that, because you did share that with me earlier. Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up there. Then when we did the survey of the comparator communities, would they have told us their current salaries or their sort of floor? So for example, the other way around, if somebody had asked us, would we have told them $40,000 or would we have told them 42 and change if we were asked the same question?
That's
So
good.
that's a good point. I was asked that question and I provided them with the base salary as contained in the bylaw. So what I may do is do some follow-up with our comparators and make sure I'm getting an apples to apples comparison. In some cases, I know it was the current salary. Now, I'm also not sure if other municipalities necessarily factor in a cost of living increase. So I can do some double checking on the numbers between now and the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Can you, sorry, just related to that, there was to Indira's point about, you know, the difference between the median and the average. If you can tease that information out, they kind of got lost in the narratives here. I wasn't exactly sure. So for example, the first two slides in that file, the first one is average. It says including average of 8 municipalities, and the other one says including a median of 8 municipalities. But within a specific municipality, I couldn't understand how the two numbers would change unless councillors got different salaries for some reason. So I was a little bit confused about the difference functionally between the first two sets of graphs.
I think that just may have been an error on my part. So what I was trying to indicate is that in each graph, the last two sets of bars indicate what the average is of all the municipalities and what the median is for all the municipalities. So the individual numbers for municipalities are just one straight number. So what you see for Kingston is just Kingston salary. It's not any averaging out of different council levels or those type of things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I realized it was
a mistake. Yeah, no, I was looking, I thought that was the case. And then when I was comparing them, I only looked at the last column. So yeah,
And,
I understand the difference there. Yeah, thanks, Derek.
Should bring that up, my lack of clarity with my statistical analysis professor in the
No, that's why you're here.
PMTA program.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations? No.
if I may, Laura, just to
Yes.
make sure I have a plan going forward, is from the information I've got, it seems like there's a bit of a preference towards looking at a ratio in terms of the budget aspect. Indira provided me with an interesting way of looking at it, more of proportionality as opposed to a ratio, a different metric. So I think what I might do is package some new metrics that focus more on ones that have been discussed here and share them with the committee over the holiday. I'll work on that just as going forward, because it seems like those are the preferred options at this point. So
Okay.
I always like to have a go forward plan, so something's not left in the ether. So I can do that, and I'll also offer people, if they think of another metric or would like me to run some numbers for them, please just contact me directly, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Derek, thank you very much. And I would say I found the table format very helpful, and it might be helpful if you could, I know I calculated them, but we need to receive them from you. If you could calculate both the average and the median, that may solidify our thinking.
Yes, most certainly can do that. Thanks to the wonderful world of Excel, it's a couple of auto formulas away.
Thank you. That would be great. Okay, so we move on then regarding the final reporting of the draft process. We're done with the last topic. Okay. All right, so let's discuss that. So did you want to lead this discussion, Derek, of how this normally goes, or give us some insight how this works?
I'll make a quick comment here. This was on the agenda for the last meeting, but unfortunately we didn't have time to get to it. I don't think it begs a large discussion today. With my initial work plan, I think we'll probably have to add another meeting of discussion. I don't think we're quite at the stage where in January at the 19th meeting, we can present a draft report. I think there's more discussion that needs to be had. And I'm not seeing anybody disagreeing with that. So I think it would just be getting people thinking about, is there anybody who would be interested in volunteering to either help author or to author the final report? Traditionally, it has been a committee member who's taken on that role. I, as clerk, can help provide some support to that, but it is a citizen-led committee, so staff, it's not like a traditional case where staff would bring a report and then the committee would vote on it. So basically looking if there's anybody who would be interested in assisting in that process, as well as traditionally the person who has authored or persons who have authored the report have attended the council meeting where it's presented to help provide more details. Now, again, it doesn't have to be one and the same. So it would just be seeing if there's anybody interested in taking on those roles. Laura, I would say, just to avoid any awkwardness, that people don't necessarily have to put their names out here tonight, but if people are interested, perhaps what they can do is contact me to find out a bit more, and it can be more discussed at a future meeting. But maybe I'm happy myself or Janet can answer any questions about that process, or maybe somebody has a experience working on this in the past that can help guide this process. So I'll leave it at that and open it up if there's any thoughts or suggestions. Okay,
thank you, Derek. Any questions, any thoughts, suggestions, volunteers? Any volunteers? No. Okay, well.
No, I'm not. Yeah, no.
You did a great job.
You put your hand up, Lindsay.
I know.
I think you'd be great, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I actually don't mind. I'll consider this. I just need to get through this holiday season before I really consider it. I love putting this stuff together. So this is not, that's not, but I'm looking at the document that was sent out, City of Kingston City Council Agenda Meeting 11/2018, Report 39 received from the Council Remuneration Committee. That's basically what we're expected to do. This like 16-page templated, almost, not really, but correct? Like, is that, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just sort of filling in and putting current numbers and current data.
It doesn't have to stray far from that. I will note in a discussion I had with Laura that a significant amount of that report is information from a consultant that met with the last committee to help them get through a decision-making process. So that is not something that has currently been discussed at this committee. Just I don't feel that it might, hopefully it's not necessary. but and I'm seeing people shaking their heads, nodding their heads in agreement. So the report can be whatever the committee or the drafter wants it to be, but yes, that is a good template there. And I think Janet can provide some more context as she was involved with the last remuneration committee.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, I just wanted to share that in the sort of the last iteration of this committee, there were some additional tasks that were assigned to the committee that this committee has not been assigned to look at. One of those was the loss of the 1/3 tax-free component. Previously, 1/3 of a council member's salary was considered to be tax-free. That is something that was removed at the federal level. So the committee needed to assess that as part of council's overall remuneration and the potential sort of income tax implications and that sort of thing. There was also the question with regards to part-time versus full-time counselors, which was in the previous committee's mandate, but as we've sort of touched on a couple times tonight, is not within the scope of this committee's mandate. So that did lead to some additional volume in the report last time that wouldn't need to be included this time.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Does that help, Lindsay? Okay, good.
Just for the benefit tonight, I've been taking some more detailed notes on the discussion because I feel that it would be helpful for whoever the author is capturing some of the general themes of the discussions we've had. These won't necessarily be included in the meeting minutes, but more of just notes for our own purposes as a committee writing that final report.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Derek. Okay, so should we move on to finish the agenda? We're off.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, it's actually the previous agenda item. If I can just a request for Derek, when you're preparing the revised sort of metric information and firming up whether it's current information or on the book sort of nominal value, if you could save us the trouble of doing the math ourselves, if you could calculate based on the metric in that last column of what the mean is per operating budget and per operating plus capital budget, what that would correspond to if we multiplied, Kingston's operating budget or operating plus capital budget by that mean value or median value, what would be the compensation, just to save us that step to have, so we can all agree on what that calculation is. That would be helpful, I think.
I can do that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. That'd be great. Okay, so do we have any new motions? No, okay. Notices of motions? No. Other business? No. Correspondence? No. Our date of our next meeting is January 19th, 2022 at 5:30 Wednesday. Does that work for everybody? I guess, hopefully. And I need someone to vote for. No, I need someone to. What do I need, Derek?
We need a mover and a seconder for adjournment and then a vote. I see Lindsay and Jordan were
Oh, God help
pretty
me.
quick on that.
Thank you. Okay.
You're doing great, Laura.
It's been a while. Thank you.
The Monday before Christmas.
Yeah, it's been quite the day, but I don't want to go there. Okay, so yes, so I declare this meeting officially adjourned. There we go.
Thanks, everyone.
Vote.
Have a great night, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I really
Happy
appreciate it.
holidays.
So close to Christmas.
Night,
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye. Cheers.